Life is not something that happens to you. It is how you reorganize what is happening. Try asking yourself this, not with skepticism but with the utmost sincerity you have. Have you ever truly been so engrossed that you forgot who you were? A strange moment when time no longer flows, when the self no longer reflects onto others, when every cell in you is unified with the action. You are not living, you are in the flow, and that is why I chose The Flow of Mihály Csíkszentmihályi, not because it is a classic book, not because it is quoted in TT or the SF help rankings, but because it speaks of a lived experience a person can feel even before they understand it rationally. This book does not teach you to get rich. It does not promise you will be happy. It does a harder thing, helping you rearrange the scattered pieces of life to see that they were never random. If you have ever felt life slipping from your grasp, not in a tragic way but in a loosely flowing, shapeless way, then you should live with this book instead of just reading it. Don't listen to me or the author. Turn each page with the mindset of someone finding their way back to the home they had forgotten. And if what I share can touch somewhere within you, a long-standing crack, a small streak of light, then please click follow this channel. Not for the algorithm but because sometimes we need a common rhythm to rethink how we are living. I don't promise that this video or this book will change your life. I just hope that even once in your life, you will have a moment when you look up and whisper, "Ah, so this is when I am truly living." And if so, this journey is completely worthwhile. Now, let me tell you a summary of what's good about this book that I am introducing. I will begin. You can live in a house 3 times bigger than your actual needs, step on cold tiles and still not feel cool, lie in the middle of a splendid living room and still feel your life is as small as a speck of dust. The wealthiest people I have ever met often lack nothing to buy. ***, but they are always lacking a reason to get up early in the morning. Mihály Csíkszentmihályi, a name many struggle to pronounce. He does not try to sugarcoat anything. He does not promise to lead you to the land of peace or teach you how to master your destiny. Instead, he pulls you back to a question so simple, it's heartbreaking. If we have all the conditions for happiness, why do we still feel miserable? What we call happiness is often substituted for comfort. You can turn on the air conditioner at 23 degrees, sit on an imported sofa, and drink a perfect cup of Colombian coffee, but none of those things guarantee you are living a life of depth. Mihály begins by stripping the concept of happiness away from all the layers of luxury that the modern world has draped over it. And he does not speak based on intuition. He is a scientist, and for decades, his research team has performed hundreds of thousands of real-time recordings of people's psychological states in every living circumstance, every class, and every continent. He calls it the experience sampling method, where people not only say whether they are happy or miserable, but also record when, where, and what they were doing when that emotion appeared. The results are unlike anything you have ever read in SF help books. It turns out the moments described as the happiest did not come from resting, entertaining, or spending. They appeared at odd times when people were solving math problems, gardening, playing music, repairing machinery, working passionately, and sometimes even in the middle of a crisis. In other words, happiness does not come from doing less but from doing wholeheartedly in a world that operates on data and performance. That assertion is like a slap in the face of consumerist thinking. Mihály offers a completely different definition. Happiness is when you reach the state of flow, where the self disappears, time dissolves, and you merge into the action as if nothing else exists but it. Imagine you are an entrepreneur in the middle of the product development stage. You worked 14 hours a day but do not feel tired. You forget to eat. You forget the day, only knowing that you are living in every decision, every line of code, every testing step. No one needs to force you. No reward is needed. No praise is necessary. The very act you are performing is the reward that is flow. And that is the only thing Mihály believes is worth pursuing for a lifetime. He explains that human consciousness is like a limited processor. You can only focus on a certain amount of experience in each moment. And if you do not actively direct the stream of information flowing into your mind, it will turn into chaos. That is why many people, even when at ease, feel restless. Leisure does not lead to happiness if we do not know what to do with it. Mihály tells about people living in adversity who still had positive life experiences, such as a paralyzed woman who found flow in mouth painting, or a worker in harsh conditions who still felt the day was fulfilled because he could repair machinery, like solving a difficult problem. They are not happy because of pleasant circumstances. They are happy because they found a way to reorganize their consciousness, to turn any circumstance into a lively game. There is a terrifying thing that Mihály points out. The majority of people live without ever experiencing the state of flow. They live by inertia, reacting to external events, controlled by tastes, by advertising, by social pressures. They think they are being self-directed, but they are actually being swept into a reverse flow, a flow without direction, without control, and ultimately without meaning. If you are in business, you can easily confuse the state of being busy with living in flow. You might think you are at the peak when handling dozens of emails, constantly attending meetings, and signing million-dollar contracts. But Mihály will ask you, what percentage of that time did you truly feel immersed in the action, forgot yourself, and saw everything become seamlessly natural? That question is not easy to answer, but if you can answer it, you will also know whether you are truly living or just surviving. When Mihály introduced the concept of consciousness as an energy system, he was not just playing with words. He described consciousness as a limited capital flow, like a business budget. If you do not actively allocate it, it will automatically flow to the places where it is easiest to consume. The easy things, instant entertainment, quick and hollow emotions. This may seem contradictory to the popular belief that freedom to do what you like and think what you want will lead to happiness. But Mihály clarifies that freedom does not inherently come with quality of experience. If there is no internal structure, it means you might be so free that no one controls you, but you cannot control yourself either. The internal chaos, as he describes it, is the underlying condition for the low-key dissatisfaction, for the sense of meaninglessness that not a few successful people often experience. They have reached the peak but do not know what for. They have won the game but no longer feel interested. Asterisk. Mihály does not judge. He points out that the problem lies not in the destination, but in how the journey is experienced from within. One of the examples he gives is how many people look forward to a vacation to relax, but then feel empty during the break. The reason is that the state of rest often lacks clear goals, lacks immediate feedback, and lacks the sense of agency and control, the factors that create flow. In other words, they escape from work, not to live, but to drift. Mihály also cites studies showing that children in deep play enter the state of flow much more naturally than adults, not because children are smarter, but because no psychological barrier interrupts them between themselves and the action. They do not care if someone is judging, if they are achieving, or if they are being recognized. They do it simply because the act itself is engaging. That is primal flow, something we lose as we grow older. Adults, especially in the business environment, often use achievement to measure, but Mihály reminds us that the people who achieve the deepest states of flow often do not focus on the outcome at all. They focus on the process, and that is what helps them live more profoundly and sustainably, regardless of the result. Imagine an artist painting. If he is too concerned with whether the painting will sell, he will no longer be in the flow. If an entrepreneur overcalculates the ROI for every hour, he will never experience the feeling of losing track of time while creating a new product. You cannot both control too tightly and live wholeheartedly. Flow requires a kind of surrender, not a surrender of the action, but a surrender of the self. Mihály also points out something few dared to say. Happiness does not necessarily come with comfort. In some cases, states full of tension, complexity, and even an element of pain are precisely what create the deepest flow. Like a bruised mountain climber who, upon reaching the peak, feels his mind open up like a long dusty door suddenly flung open. You cannot measure contentment solely by a smile. You must measure it by the depth of the experience. At this point, Chapter 1 of Mihály becomes dangerous. In a good way, he demolishes nearly all popular assumptions about the good life. No longer is it true that having more means being happier. No longer is it true that rest is the ultimate reward. No longer is it true that freedom is the solution. All must be re-evaluated if you truly want to live wholeheartedly. And to do that, he believes people need to learn a skill that is rarely taught: redesigning internal experience, not changing circumstances, because that is not easy, but changing how we interact with those circumstances. Just as a smart investor does not pour money into an easily profitable market, but seeks to correctly read the market psychology, a person in flow does not choose easy work, but chooses to work differently. Mihály describes the optimal experience as an order within consciousness, and to create that order, you need an activity that is clear enough in its goals, complex enough to be engaging, flexible enough for you to control, and compelling enough for you to forget time. Without those elements, flow does not happen, and without flow, happiness is just a hanging promise. So he asks, not with a question, but with the cold gaze of a scientist who has listened to tens of thousands of states of consciousness, how will you live the rest of your life? Chasing after short-term pleasant stimuli, or learning to create an internal mental ecosystem that is rich and coherent enough for you to feel that every day is part of something meaningful? That is not a rallying cry. That is a life plan. Imagine you are a CEO walking into the office in the morning. Before you even sit down, your email is full of complaints. The phone rings constantly. Your assistant reports a key employee has resigned. An important meeting is postponed at the last minute. And in that chaos, a small part of your mind still tries to whisper, is all of this really necessary? Mihály begins this chapter not with a statement but with a mental surgery. He does not ask how you are feeling, but how your consciousness is operating. This is no longer a philosophical issue. This is a technology of survival. If you do not understand the structure of your consciousness, it is like running a company without knowing where the budget is. Consciousness, according to Mihály, is not a vague black box, but a limited energy system that can be measured, analyzed, and optimized. It is the processing center for every experience. Anything you feel, think, or decide goes through it. And like a closed economic system, you cannot overspend. If you use it incorrectly, you fall into an attention deficit. If you allocate it wisely, you create an experience surplus. Every day we face thousands of streams of information, but only a very small fraction of it is allowed to enter the illuminated area of consciousness. And the terrifying thing is that the majority of people leave the power of selection to circumstance. Advertising, news, and social media, all of them are scrambling for mastery over your consciousness. You think you are free but are actually being remotely controlled. Mihály calls the control of consciousness the prerequisite for happiness, a gentle way of stating a harsh truth. If you do not know what you are thinking, you do not know how you are living. He divides consciousness into two main parts, intention and attention. Intention is what you want. Attention is the energy you expend to achieve it. A person with strong intentions, but who does not know how to control attention, is like a CEO with a great vision, but who does not know how to manage cash flow. Sooner or later, they will face collapse. The flow state only occurs when there is absolute synchronization between intention and attention. You not only want to do something, but you dedicate all your mental energy to it. Nothing intervenes, no fragmented distractions. The entire internal system is directed toward one point, and in that moment, you are no longer separate from the action. You become the action itself. To illustrate, Mihály tells the story of a craftsman working with wood. He could spend hours sanding a small corner of a table, not because anyone asked or paid him, but because in that moment, everything felt right. The outside world ceased to matter, time lost its weight, and all that remained were the hand movements, the wood grain, and the sharp focus like a blade. In business, this state is not uncommon but is often misunderstood. People confuse flow with busyness, and working hard with living wholeheartedly in the action. Mihály draws a clear line. If you are working but still check the clock every 10 minutes, you are not in flow. If you need someone's recognition to continue, you are not in flow. Flow is when the action itself is enough to make you forget yourself, forget the goal, and even forget the reward. He also emphasizes an important point. The system of consciousness is not fixed. It can be trained just like muscle. The more correctly you use it, the more flexible, strong, and precise it becomes. But this requires prolonged self-awareness, not the kind of mindfulness printed on a t-shirt, but a quiet discipline, similar to how a professional chess player trains to sense every move of the opponent. Mihály suggests, think of consciousness as a mental startup. If you do not control the expenditure of your mental energy, if you do not analyze the stream of experience, if you do not adjust your focus strategy, you will constantly incur losses, and the price is a life lacking depth, direction, and genuine pleasure. Mihály does not shy away from the cruel consequences when a person loses control of consciousness. He describes it as a slow form of self-destruction, not by knife or fire but by relentless dispersion. You wake up with the intention of writing a plan, then get lost in the news abyss, then social media, then messages, then guilt, then stress, and then forget what you initially wanted. And when that repeats hundreds of days, thousands of weeks, you will wake up one morning and no longer know who you are. This does not happen suddenly. It occurs as a subtle slide, like a train deviating from the tracks millimeter by millimeter. Mihály calls it the leakage of conscious energy, an image that could not be more accurate. Every time you relinquish control of your attention, you do not just lose focus, you lose identity. He cites a series of examples to prove this, from the housewife who feels invisible amidst the routine of childcare, to the young man obsessed with gaming, not out of passion, but because it is the only place he feels a little bit of power. In all cases, the common thread is that the system of consciousness is neglected, unorganized, and unguided, and the consequence is a growing sense of emptiness. Conversely, Mihály speaks of people who, even in unpleasant circumstances, maintain inner vitality. A factory worker knows how to turn each repetitive task into a small challenge to overcome. A lonely elderly woman creates games for herself while doing housework. They do not wait for the world to bring excitement. They construct the experience from within. That may sound mundane, but Mihály proves that this is the core of life competence. Not IQ, not EQ, not background, but the ability to control and organize consciousness in all situations. A key point he makes is flexibility. Consciousness should not be too rigid, because then it is easily broken by surprise. But it also must not be too loose, because then it will be appropriated. Just like a business system needs processes that are stable enough but still require room for creativity. A person with good control over consciousness is one who knows when to focus, when to relax, and does so purposefully. Mihály calls this the integrated self, not a rigid, arrogant, or immutable self, but a flexible system that knows what it wants, knows what to care about, and knows how to reject what does not serve that internal structure. It is here that he introduces an extremely sharp paradox. True freedom does not come from being able to do anything but from being able to not do what is unnecessary. This definition is completely contrary to how modern society usually teaches us to understand freedom. And if you are living in the business world, where every piece of information, every person, every call is vying for your attention, you need to understand this better than anyone. Every time you answer an unnecessary email, you are withdrawing mental capital from an important investment. Every time you let insecurity guide your behavior, you are breaking your own internal structure. So, how do you reorganize consciousness? Mihály does not offer a simple exercise. He does not advise you to meditate for 10 minutes every morning or write a gratitude journal. Instead, he asks you to become a true architect. Observe every stream of thought like observing a blueprint. Measure the flow of attention like measuring structural load. You must see the fragmented pieces in your mind and then knit them back together into a mental ecosystem. And only then can flow occur. Not because you are good enough, skilled enough, or successful enough, but because you have created an internal structure that allows consciousness to operate, like a river passing through the canyons of life, undammed with a constant flow. Mihály closes chapter 2 with an undisguised warning. If you cannot control your consciousness, you will be its victim. Just as an out-of-control business system will go bankrupt, a life out of internal control will become aimless, dissatisfied, and eventually mentally paralyzed. Internal freedom, he says, does not come from emotion. It comes from structure. And that structure is not granted to you. You must build it yourself. There is something that people with rich life experience all know but rarely say. The quality of life is not proportional to the amount of assets or the favorability of circumstances. It is proportional to a much more elusive variable: enjoyment. Enjoyment here is not consumption, not pure pleasure, not feeling comfortable. Mihály 6 meters HJ wants us to strip away that common definition and look at the core. Enjoyment is when we are fully present in an experience, feeling it like an electric current running through the body and mind, so that we realize we are living, not just drifting through. And as always, he does not say it in mystical language. He analyzes it like an economist dissecting value. Enjoyment is a form of emotional profit that occurs when an experience simultaneously meets 3 factors. It has clear goals, is challenging, and provides immediate feedback. If one of the 3 is missing, the emotion you receive will only be fleeting. But if all 3 are present, you enter a special energy zone where you and the world are no longer separate. Mihály gives an example. 2 people are climbing the same mountain. One complains of fatigue, is annoyed because there is no phone signal, and longs for the end. The other takes each step as if every rock were a dialogue with nature. Same circumstances, same weather, same slope, but the lived experience is worlds apart, and the difference lies in the ability to organize the internal experience. This is the point where he begins to separate himself from all simple theories of happiness. He says, "You cannot be made happy. No one, not even the world, can give you a good experience. You have to learn how to create them, just as a craftsman does not sit and wait for wood to turn into a chair. You must actively participate in creating the value of every moment." And from there, he offers a shocking definition. Enjoyment is the sign of psychological growth. It is not a purely emotional reaction, but a byproduct of striving. You only truly enjoy when you have to overcome something. It does not have to be a major obstacle, but it must be a purposeful effort. Mihály tells the story of an amateur violin player. No performance, no audience, no pay. That person dedicates 1 hour every evening to practice. Every note, every scale, every solo is played with focus, no less than a professional artist. And that person feels profound contentment, not because of the result, but because they are living wholly in the process. It is the commitment to the process that makes life worth living. For Mihály, this is not just an isolated case, it is a principle of survival. He points out that enjoyment does not appear when you consume, but when you participate. The deeper you participate, the more actively you reorganize the experience, the greater your ability to taste the true quality of life. And in the business world, where everything is measured by metrics and KPIs, this concept may seem vague, but he presents an irrefutable argument. A business that does not create an experience of enjoyment for its founder and employees will eventually lose its soul. You can achieve financial goals, but if no one in the team feels alive while working, that company is just a machine, and machines can be replaced. Mihály encourages a very different way of life, not one to maximize convenience, but one to maximize the quality of experience. Every action, no matter how small, can become a point of enjoyment if you know how to set goals, create challenges, and receive feedback. Even repetitive tasks like washing dishes or writing emails can become a living ritual instead of a mechanical chore. He does not romanticize life, but he believes that if people learn how to redesign the inner experience to touch true enjoyment, they can still live with a sense of completeness, sharpness, and direction, even in less than ideal conditions. Mihály does not simplify enjoyment into a formula. He very clearly separates it from the concept of pleasure. Pleasure is what you receive when everything is readily served, such as good food, a nice piece of music, an engaging movie. It is passive, short-term, easily consumed, and thus also easily leaves us empty afterward. Enjoyment, on the other hand, requires you to participate in the process of creating it. You are not just a user, but a co-creator. This difference is extremely important because modern society, according to Mihály, has done too well in producing pleasure, but has almost forgotten how to nurture enjoyment. From the food industry to the media, everything is designed to create instant reactions, but rarely does anything require mental effort. The consequence is a society saturated with stimuli but lacking in depth. Mihály does not call for us to abandon convenience or live ascetically. He merely suggests a shift in focus from consuming life to designing life. This means you do not wait for a vacation, a party, or a promotion to feel satisfied. You turn every day, every hour, even when doing seemingly mundane tasks, into a structured, purposeful, and meaningful experience. He tells of a senior manager he once interviewed. This person initially thought that joy in work only came from big wins, million-dollar deals, market expansion, or successful fundraising. But later, he realized that what truly excited him was handwriting each presentation slide, adjusting every number, and building every line of the script to persuade investors. The deepest joy came not from the peak, but from engaging in the details. That is what Mihály calls the beauty of the process. When you learn to love every step, no matter how small or arduous, the process itself becomes the reward. But if you only focus on the result, every day that passes will be just a rationalized waiting. He analyzes that true enjoyment is never accidental. It is the result of a trained mental system that knows how to focus, set the right level of challenge, create its own feedback, detect small progress, and acknowledge it. A person with this ability lives markedly differently from the average person, not because their circumstances are better, but because they can transform all circumstances into living material. Mihály also makes an observation that deconstructs modern society. Many people believe that the quality of life increases when they have more choices. but the truth is the opposite. The more choices you have, the easier it is to be dispersed. The more dispersed you are, the harder it is to focus. And when you cannot focus, you cannot enjoy. You might have 500 songs on your playlist, but if you listen while scrolling on your phone, you won't remember any melody. In a world saturated with stimuli, the ability to focus on a single experience is a superpower. The person with that superpower is not someone who is good at enduring, but someone who knows how to create meaning from what they do. Mihály does not describe them as saints. He describes them as extremely realistic people who know that every minute of life is an asset, and as an asset, it must be invested, not wasted. He suggests that if everyone could design 2 to 3 activities each day according to the flow structure, meaning they have goals, challenges, and feedback, the quality of life would improve markedly. No need for leaps, just building small bricks of experience, and if you maintain it over time, you no longer need to seek happiness, because you are already living in it. Mihály concludes this chapter with a simple yet evocative image. Life is like a musical composition, where you are the player, the composer, and the listener. If you play in a forced manner, the music will be out of rhythm. If you play by the book, it will be bland. But if you play with complete presence, every note becomes sharp. Every melody will bear your own imprint, and that is the quality of a life with depth. Have you ever seen an artist playing an instrument as if the world disappeared? Or a surfer, eyes unblinking, body and wave merging together like a symphony? Or an engineer coding, forgetting hunger, thirst, day and night? All those moments, regardless of whether they come from art, sport, intellectual, or manual labor, share a strange commonality, a state of intensely concentrated consciousness where one is no longer separate from the action. Mihály calls it flow, and in this chapter, he decides to delve into an essential question. Can that state be repeated? If so, what conditions create it? In economics, we not only care about the product, but also the production process. If flow is the optimal experience, Mihály's question is, what is the formula that produces it? And like a mental strategist, he begins to disassemble this experience into components, not to destroy its beauty but to find a way to recreate it in even the most mundane circumstances. The first condition, clear goals. No one gets into flow without knowing what they are doing. You can live dreamily, but you cannot achieve the flow state if your mind is drifting aimlessly. Mihály analyzes that even a small goal immediately provides consciousness with a focal point. It's like shining a light into a dark corner of the mind, allowing all internal energy to converge there. The carpenter wants to cut a table corner perfectly. The doctor wants to stitch a wound without leaving a scar. The chef wants to time the boiling point exactly right. This very clarity is the first door leading to flow. But goals alone are not enough. The second condition, immediate feedback. Try to imagine playing a video game but having to wait an hour to know if you win or lose, or painting a picture but not seeing the colors until the next week. The flow state cannot exist in a space of delay. For the mind to be fully immersed, it needs to know almost instantly that the action it just took had an effect. It doesn't have to be praise. Sometimes it's just the feeling of the finger hitting the right piano key, or seeing data returned with the correct syntax, or simply the client's sigh of satisfaction when you have just completed a product. Mihály emphasizes that feedback does not necessarily come from the outside. The master of flow is the one who builds an internal feedback system for themselves. They feel every small step of progress. They read the subtle signals in the process, and this variability allows them to maintain uninterrupted absorption. The third condition, and the crucial one, challenge balanced with skill. If a task is too easy, you will be bored. If it is too difficult, you will feel anxiety. Flow occurs when the challenge is just enough to force you to use all your capabilities, but does not exceed the limit that makes you feel helpless. Mihály illustrates this with a simple but sharp diagram. The vertical axis is the difficulty of the challenge. The horizontal axis is the level of skill. The flow zone lies right in the middle, where these two factors are in dynamic balance. When you get better, the challenge needs to increase. When the challenge is high, you must learn more skills. Otherwise, the flow will break. This may sound obvious, but Mihály points out that most organizations, schools, and even families fail to maintain that balanced zone. People are given tasks that are too easy or too difficult. Children are forced to learn things that are not appropriate for their level. Employees are burned out by over-demanding work or, conversely, stuffed into monotonous jobs. And when the balanced zone is broken, flow has no room to live. With that analysis, Mihály lays the foundation for a completely new type of life design. A design based on the rhythm between challenge and ability. You do not choose a task because it is easy or hard. You choose it because it has the potential to create flow. And then you adjust, increasing your skill or lowering the difficulty, to always keep yourself in the most vibrant energy zone. Mihály goes beyond the three basic conditions to trace more subtle nuances. The auxiliary pieces that, if missing, flow will never reach the necessary depth. He observes that people who frequently achieve flow are not only technically skilled or mentally disciplined, they are also extremely good at limiting distraction. That means that for flow to occur, you need an environment capable of supporting high-level concentration. It does not necessarily mean absolute silence, but it must be structured. A professional gamer can be immersed in a noisy tournament, but the perspective, the goal, the reflexes all have been organized. Conversely, a person sitting in an open office with continuous alerts and constantly popping emails will not be able to maintain any state of focus long enough for flow to arise. Mihály does not advocate withdrawal from life. He encourages redesigning the way we live, just like an architect who knows how to adjust lighting, ventilation, and materials. A person who wants to live in flow also needs to know how to organize time, space, and especially the mind. He describes a phenomenon he calls intentional loss of self, meaning that when you enter the flow, you temporarily forget your personal self. But it is not because you are lost, but because you actively dissolve into the process. This is an advanced state, and it only occurs when the three preceding conditions: goal, feedback, challenge, and skill are met, plus a certain level of trust in the very action one is performing. In the business world, this might sound like the zone, the state where workers forget everything around them, but Mihály clearly distinguishes. Flow is not racing against time, nor is it working like a machine. Flow is when every moment carries meaning, and you perceive it with your full mental presence. One of the deepest passages in this chapter is when he analyzes that the flow state is not solely an individual privilege. It can be the structure of an organization. That is, if a company knows how to design work so that employees are always adequately challenged, have clear goals, receive fast feedback, and have autonomy in the process, the entire organization will be like a flow ecosystem. He cites examples from design companies, software firms, and laboratories where employees describe the feeling of going to work as no different from playing a creative game. They do not need to force themselves to concentrate, and no one needs to supervise them, because the job itself, if designed correctly, is a self-operating engine. Mihály calls it a flow organization, where mental energy is regenerated, not consumed. But perhaps the most subtle thing he shares is the following paradox. Flow cannot be forced, but it can be prepared. You cannot say, "I will achieve flow at 8 a.m. tomorrow," but you can arrange all the conditions, choose the right task, create the appropriate environment, set the right challenge, and learn internal feedback. If you do that long enough, flow will come, not like a miracle but as a natural consequence. Mihály does not promise that this state will be easy to achieve, but he proves that people who live many hours per week in flow, regardless of what they do, generally have a higher level of life satisfaction, more stable energy, and, most importantly, feel that their life has direction. And that is the difference between a life with internal order and a life chasing external stimuli. He concludes chapter 4 with a statement that seems gentle, but contains his entire philosophy of life. Life is not what happens to you. It is how you structure what is happening. And flow is not a reward for the lucky. It is the result of living as a creator, not just of products, but of one's own experience every hour, every minute, every moment. Modern people often treat the body like a rental car. They use it to move from one meeting to the next party, for work, for eating, for dressing, and they usually only really pay attention to it when it starts to break down. We talk about the mind, about emotions, about mental experience, but we forget that all of these things happen inside a complex yet astonishing, limited biological machine, the body. In this chapter, Mihály brings us back to the starting point, the physical self, not to praise the body as an aesthetic object, but to show that the body itself is the first gateway to flow. He tells the story of climbers, skydivers, dancers, swimmers, athletes, and martial artists, people for whom the feeling of melting into action occurs, not through vague belief, but through the precise combination of heart rate, breathing, mechanical stress, and reflex processing. Flow in those cases is no longer a metaphor, it is a physical reality. A skier cannot think about deadlines while speeding down a slope at 60 kilometers per hour. A dancer cannot think about fame when every muscle group is straining to maintain balance. At that moment, the body forces the mind to be present, and it is in that moment of complete convergence, where the boundary between the physical and the conscious is gone, that flow appears. Mihály emphasizes that the body is not a tool controlled by the mind. It is part of consciousness, and if you neglect or suppress it, you are losing one of the most direct gateways to the flow state. He analyzes the difference between three types of interaction with the body. 1. Consumption, where the body is a tool for enjoyment, pleasing, sleeping, pleasure. 2. Avoidance, where the body is seen as a burden, pain, sickness, aging. 3. Active partnership, where the body is a companion in experience, moving, creating, exploring. Only the third type creates the precondition for flow, and it demands a completely different relationship. You do not own the body, you live with it. The interesting thing is that you do not need to be an athlete to experience flow through the body. Mihály tells of gardeners, long-distance walkers, rowers, and Tai Chi practitioners. These activities are not glamorous or performative, but if done with concentration, they still create a deep state of absorption. A busy entrepreneur can find mental recovery not in the gym, but in 20 minutes of cycling every morning, when there are no spreadsheets, no notifications, only the steady rhythm of the legs and deep breathing. A software engineer can find a cleansing of consciousness in running, not to burn calories, but because each stride is a structured unit of life. Mihály clearly distinguishes between physical activities that foster flow and mere physical activities. Walking on a treadmill while watching a video or listening to a podcast is not flow. Participating in a football match while your mind is preoccupied elsewhere is not flow. Flow only occurs when the action is an end in itself, when the movement itself provides joy and meaning. He also acknowledges a social reality. Modern society does not encourage us to respect the body as a source of flow. It forces us to sit for long periods, move little, live indoors, eat industrial food, sleep poorly, and consume excessively. The body becomes a victim requiring recovery instead of a partner for living, and thus, flow derived from the body becomes increasingly rare, replaced by stimulation from screens and caffeine. One sharp point Mihály makes is that when we use the body as a tool to achieve flow, we not only enhance the quality of the current experience, but also restructure the self-perception of the body. The body in the flow state is no longer a container for anxieties about appearance, age, or gender. It becomes a precise, subtle machine serving a clear life goal. You no longer care what you look like. You care what you are doing, what you are feeling, and how you are present in the moment. Mihály tells of a middle-aged woman who began learning to swim at the age of 50. Initially, she only wanted to improve her health. But gradually, swimming became a ritual where she could merge with the water, listen to her body, and feel every movement. There was no audience, no score, only the water, the moving skin and flesh, and a profound silence. She described that feeling as like returning to herself. And for the first time in that context, Mihály presents a proposition that seems paradoxical yet profound. If you want to live as a spiritual being, first, live fully with your body. This seems simple, but is in opposition to many things that control us daily. Advertising encourages us to consume to forget the body. Technology makes us live in our heads. Education encourages intellect but neglects movement. The result is millions of people living like detached, floating heads, severed from the very source of experience. Mihály does not call for us to become bodybuilders or dancers. He merely invites a reconciliation between the mechanical and conscious parts of the human being. He proves with hundreds of records from real people that flow from the body is not only real, but also one of the most accessible forms of flow. It requires no degree, no innate talent. It only requires you to dare to engage in physical action completely. Another key point he analyzes is the sensory order in the flow state derived from the body. You are not assaulted by sensations. You control them. You are not dominated by pain, nor are you lost in trivial pleasure. Instead, you create a kind of sensory harmony, as if the body and mind are running at the same frequency. That is the foundation of mental self-control. He says that if you train the ability to enter flow through the body, you also train many other fundamental capacities: concentration, persistence, sensitivity, and especially humility. When you stand before your own physical limits, muscles trembling, breath quickening, heart pounding, you cannot lie to yourself. You are forced to listen, adjust, and respect. And in that process, the self is shaped, not by theory but by direct experience. Another important point is that flow from the body has the ability to spread to other areas. Mihály observes that people who regularly engage in absorbed physical activities, such as martial arts, climbing, or dancing, often also achieve higher flow in work, creativity, and even in relationships. The reason is that they have learned an extremely rare skill, knowing how to listen to themselves in action. And that is the foundation for being fully present in any experience. He concludes the chapter with a simple yet profound admission: in a world obsessed with speed and efficiency, the simplest way to return to oneself is to walk. No destination, no headphones, not for physical training, not to fight stress, but to remind oneself that one still has a body. And that is the first starting point for living a life of true quality. There is a paradox that no one wants to admit. The less one does, the easier it is for the human mind to become chaotic. In the most idle moments, no meetings, no emails, no chores, when many people feel the most restless, not because anything is wrong, but because they are suddenly forced to confront themselves. And that self, it turns out, is an extremely chaotic place. Mihály Csíkszentmihályi did not write this chapter as a sage or a Zen master. He wrote as an architect of the inner life, one who has disassembled hundreds of thousands of experience samples to find out when thinking helps people live more deeply and when it drowns them in turmoil. And what he discovered is that thinking, just like the body, can become a gateway to flow, but only if we know how to organize it. Right from the start, he makes a clear distinction. Not all thought is valuable thought. Many people confuse thinking a lot with thinking deeply, or confusing worrying with strategic contemplation. He cites research showing that most of the time, people use their minds to repeat worries, reenact grudges, or self-consume with unanswerable questions. Therefore, he poses the question: how can thinking become a creative act instead of a draining behavior? He starts by describing the flow experiences that occur in purely intellectual fields: mathematics, writing, programming, design, philosophy, scientific research. He describes moments when people forget to eat and sleep to pursue an idea, when every line of thought becomes a step forward in the creative labyrinth. No one forces them. There is no immediate reward. There is only the pure fascination of a logical sequence gradually becoming clear. That is the flow of thought. To achieve that state, Mihály identifies conditions similar to those for the body. Clear goals. For example, proving a theorem, finishing a chapter, fully understanding an idea, a level of challenge that matches intellectual skill, and feedback, which here does not come from the outside, but from the very internal structure of thought. For example, knowing that one is getting closer to the solution. He tells of scientists, musicians, and programmers, people who can live for hours in this state, where the stream of thought flows like an underground river, and they simply swim along, exploring, refining. They no longer ask the question, "What am I thinking for?" The process of thinking itself is the reward. Mihály contrasts this with negative thinking states, when people lack goal structure, lack feedback, and are stuck in useless loops of anxiety, rumination, and unfounded assumptions. He calls this cognitive chaos, a form of uncontrolled use of the mind, where every thought generates a side branch and the entire system falls into paralysis. From there, he leads to a crucial concept: structured thinking. This is not a natural skill. It must be trained. Just as a good programmer knows how to organize source code so that it is readable, modifiable, and scalable, a person who knows how to think also needs the ability to organize logic, branch ideas, test hypotheses, and adjust direction when necessary. Thinking is not a rain shower. It is a water system, and the person who does not learn to build pipes for their thoughts will forever live in a flood. Mihály tells of a mathematician describing the flow state while working. "Every time I get closer to the solution, it feels like listening to music. There's rhythm, there's progress, and if I miss a single note, everything collapses." This shows that the flow of thought is not as dry as we might think. It has aesthetics, it has fluidity, and most importantly, it has the ability to make a person feel alive. Mihály does not stop at describing how flow occurs in thought. He takes another crucial step, analyzing the conditions for sustaining that flow in the modern environment. where distraction comes not from noise, but from the speed and fragmentation of information. He warns that a person can be very intelligent, very knowledgeable, but if they do not know how to structuralize their sequence of thoughts, that intellect will also fall into a state of dispersion. It is like a contractor who has all the building materials but no blueprint. The more they think, the more confused they become. He gives examples of writers, novelists, journalists, and scholars who describe the flow state when words begin to come to them naturally, when ideas connect like puzzle pieces falling into place. But the condition for that to happen is not random inspiration but habit. They write every day, at the same time, in the same place, with absolute respect for the process. Mihály calls this the discipline of intellectual flow, a kind of self-management that is not flashy or colorful, but extremely effective. Clear the mental environment. Ask a question that is good enough. Start from a small point, and continue even if the results are not yet visible. It is like a climber who does not need to see the summit, only needs to know they are stepping in the right direction. But he also admits that the flow of thought is one of the most easily broken types of flow, because it occurs in silence. There is no feedback from the body, no physical interaction to pull you back. Just one notification, one sound, one extraneous thought is enough to pull you out of the process. Therefore, creating an environment that protects the flow of thought is the supreme mental responsibility of the creator. And when that is achieved, the reward is not just an idea, an article, or an invention. The reward is the state of living with internal organization. You no longer feel lost amidst a world full of data and turmoil. You have a compass, and that compass is deep concentration. Mihály also points out another important thing. The flow of thought does not necessarily have to lead to great results. You do not have to write a book or invent a formula. Sometimes, it is enough to truly understand a chapter of a book, or clearly record a line of thought in a journal, or solve a small problem. Any action that makes you feel that you are understanding the world and yourself better is a sign of flow. In business, he suggests that good leaders often have this ability, thinking in flow. They are not swept away by immediate reactions. They know how to step back, organize information, and find structure in chaos. They do not just work, they think systematically, and in an era where speed often defeats depth, this ability increasingly becomes a kind of mental competitive advantage. Mihály concludes this chapter with an image that is very unscientific, yet highly evocative. He compares the flow of thought to sitting by a stream in the forest. Initially, the water is murky. You cannot see anything, but if you sit patiently, observing quietly, without stirring it, bit by bit, the water begins to settle. You see the bottom, you see every small movement, and then you understand. Clarity does not come from running out to find it, but from learning how to let thoughts reveal themselves. If you randomly ask 10 people about their job, at least 8 will respond with a sigh. For the majority of humanity, working is something that must be done, not out of passion but out of the need to survive. Work, in the eyes of many, is like an obligatory stretch between 2 vacations, a means to exist, and rarely a place to live. But Mihály does not accept that definition. He does not deny the fatigue, the pressure, or the injustice in labor, but he does not surrender to them either. He begins this chapter with a gentle but powerful push. It is not the nature of the work that makes us miserable, but the way we interact with it. And then he guides us into the strange world of those who find flow in the most seemingly mundane jobs. Throughout years of research, Mihály and his colleagues interviewed hundreds of people working in various fields: assembly line workers, doctors, mechanics, teachers, programmers, office workers, factory managers, cleaners, and engineers. And the surprising thing was that flow did not discriminate by class or title. A worker welding car frames in a factory could achieve deeper flow than a CEO if he felt mastery over the action, had clear goals, received immediate feedback, and, especially, felt he was progressing every day. He tells the story of a carpenter in Chicago. This man did only one task every day, applying the coat of paint to the car body, but he set his own set of standards: how to paint more evenly than yesterday, how to avoid rework, how to create a surface so glossy that he himself was satisfied. He received no extra praise, no performance bonus, but when asked about his job, he said something Mihály never forgot: "When I'm painting, I'm no longer a worker, I'm the shaper of speed." That sentence was not flowery language, it was a truth distilled from experience. Mihály goes against most modern management thinking by saying that work does not need external motivation. If structured correctly, it will generate its own internal motivation. But for that to happen, at least three factors must converge. 1. The person doing the work must have adequate control. 2. The goals must be clear and meaningful. And 3. Feedback must be quick and specific. And the paradox here is that work itself, which is seen as pressure, has more flow-creating elements than leisure activities. According to his research, when asked about their level of concentration, interest, and meaning, most people rated higher while working than while relaxing. But the paradox is that they still prefer leisure time because work is associated with obligation, while leisure is associated with freedom. This means people are not afraid of working. They are afraid of losing autonomy. Therefore, Mihály proposes an alternative. Instead of trying to reduce the workload, why not redesign the work as a flow-generating structure? Imagine a marketing team. Instead of handing out KPI spreadsheets and micromanaging, the manager presents a clear creative challenge, allows the team to choose the approach, and provides continuous real-time feedback. Each member is not just a person following instructions but a player in a strategy game. At that time, work is no longer a burden. It becomes a vibrant space for experimentation. Mihály does not deny that there are monotonous, heavy, or boring jobs, but he suggests that even those jobs can be restructured into mental games. The dishwasher can set a goal to clean faster, yet cleaner than yesterday. The truck driver can train their observation and reflex skills in traffic. The salesperson can turn every conversation into an art of persuasion. A key point he emphasizes is that flow does not come from the superficial interest level of the job, but from the depth you create by engaging in it. Mihály not only emphasizes the individual experience in work, he goes further. Flow is not just an individual issue but a survival strategy for the organization. A company where everyone works in flow is a self-regenerating energy ecosystem. Meanwhile, an organization where employees work out of obligation, for KP is, or out of fear of being fired, even if it achieves its goals, will gradually become empty, exhausted, and lose its identity. From that perspective, management is no longer a progress supervisor, but an architect who creates the environment for flow to arise. The role of leadership, according to Mihály, is not to motivate or inspire, but to design the job structure so that everyone can find absorption, adequate challenge, clear goals, and authentic feedback. And this does not necessarily require a large budget. Many companies have achieved this simply by restructuring tasks, allowing employees to suggest improvements, creating internal feedback cycles, breaking down goals into small groups, and introducing creative elements into repetitive work. Flow, according to Mihály, does not need theory. It needs mental logic. He tells of an emergency room nurse who described the feeling of being in flow while caring for patients. Despite the stressful environment, she felt she was living up to her true values. The reason is that she did not view each task as work but as a link in the human recovery process. Flow occurs when every small action is framed within a larger meaning. Without that frame, any job will eventually become meaningless. Mihály also exposes a common illusion that hard work equals sacrificing joy. In fact, he suggests that the person with the most flow in their work is the happiest person, not because they work less, but because every hour they work has a very high density of life. That is the kind of person who doesn't need to distress when they get home, because they don't accumulate tension during the day. They utilize energy in a structured way. Another key concept Mihály introduces is intrinsic motivation in work, which is the ability to self-generate motivation from the action being performed, without needing external rewards or control. He states clearly that any management system that relies too heavily on external rewards, from salary to praise, will cause people to lose this ability, and once lost, it is very difficult to regain. Therefore, he calls for a revolution in the way we view work. Don't ask, is this job interesting? Ask, how can I create flow from it? And to do that, we must change the very way we are present in the work. Not working to finish, not working for recognition, not working out of fear of failure, but working because the process itself is giving life. Like a chef seasoning a dish, like an engineer fine-tuning a design, like a researcher synthesizing data, every moment is a meaningful unit of life. He concludes this chapter with a realization that, if properly understood, can completely change the way we approach every morning, every job. If structured as a mental game, Work can become a source of life, and you don't need to change careers to live a worthwhile life. You just need to change how you live within that career. In a world where everyone is talking, or pretending to, the ability to sit still, alone without speaking, without holding a phone, without needing anyone to confirm one's existence is a rare type of competence. Mihály calls it the art of voluntary solitude. This chapter begins with a paradox powerful enough to make everyone living in the age of connection feel uneasy. Loneliness does not kill people. The feeling of not knowing what to do when alone is what does. What makes people afraid of solitude is not the absence of others, but the lack of organization in inner life when no one is there to distract it. Mihály recounts one of the most prominent findings during his research. People who frequently achieve flow not only know how to live with others, but also know how to live alone. It is not a sullen kind of solitude, but a form of inner independence, where they can enter the flow state even when no one is around, with no social script, no audience, just them, their consciousness, and a structured activity. He describes this type of person as the artisans of the inner world. They can sit for hours reading, writing, contemplating, drawing, arranging flowers, playing music, planning or tidying up, not for anyone, not to show off, not to take pictures for social media stories, but because the process itself gives them a sense of completeness. They are not lonely because they are an ecosystem that can self-regulate, and that is the kind of flow no one can take away. But then Mihály reverses the situation. He points out that humans cannot live entirely by themselves, and this is another paradox. We need others to understand ourselves better. The frightening thing is that many people think they are living in relationships, but are actually just living through reactions. They talk to fill the silence. They communicate to prove that they still exist, and their love, hate, anger, and compassion are based not on genuine presence but on a role they play. Mihály does not deny the complexity of relationships. He is not naive enough to believe that love automatically generates flow. On the contrary, he points out that the closer a relationship is, the higher the risk of it becoming a factory for micro-conflicts. Familiarity makes people easily contemptuous, easily ignoring efforts, and easily taking each other's presence for granted. And everything taken for granted, once not purposefully nurtured, is icily worn down. So, can flow occur between two people? Mihály answers, yes, but under stricter conditions than we imagine. First, each individual in the relationship must be strong enough in consciousness not to need the other person as a crutch. Not the "I can't live without you" type, but the "I can live alone, but I choose to live with you because being with you enriches my experience" type. This requires a very high degree of self-sufficiency, and is also why flow-generating relationships are extremely rare. Second, the two people must share a process with a goal, a shared life task that is clear and flexible enough. This could be raising children together, working on a creative project together, building a shared habit, or exploring an intellectual hobby together. If two people merely stay next to each other without co-creating something specific, flow can hardly arise. Mihály tells of elderly couples who garden together every morning, or friends who write a book together, or two people climbing a mountain and planning a trip together. There, the relationship is no longer a place for projecting expectations, but becomes a mental structure where each person can be absorbed, can grow, and can evolve not through promises, but through structured action. He does not deny that relationships can bring suffering, but he points out something often overlooked. Most of the suffering does not come because the other person is bad, but because we are not internally organized enough to enter a relationship as a complete person. Mihály continues to delve into one of the least discussed dark areas of modern society, the fear of solitude leading to dependence on relationships that do not nurture flow. People stay together not because they help each other grow, but because they are afraid to be alone. They do not look at each other to discover, but to reflect their own inner emptiness. And then, like a closed loop, the other person's presence does not bring vitality, but only exposes more clearly the discord, the unresolved trauma, the insecurity suppressed over the years. Mihály does not call for abandoning relationships. He also does not paint unrealistic ideals of romance. Instead, he offers an unglamorous yet extremely radical solution. Learn to live with yourself before engaging with anyone else. A person capable of achieving flow in solitude is someone who has built a sufficiently solid inner life structure. They do not need anyone to remind them who they are. They do not need praise to feel valuable. And this is precisely what allows them to enter a relationship as a whole, self-fundamenting, non-deficient, and non-manipulative. And when two such people meet, flow can occur between them. Not through perfect harmony, but through the commitment to step together into a shared process. A spiritual project, a common framework for life. Mihály calls this a double flow relationship structure, where each person has their own independent and complete flow, while also creating a third flow when interacting with each other. In these relationships, people do not seek to please each other, but seek to co-create a worthwhile experience. The interesting thing is that this relationship does not necessarily have to be romantic love. It can be deep friendship, a creative partner on the same frequency, a mentor and a student-tenny connection. If it has clear spiritual goals, flexible role sharing, the ability to provide feedback, and joint growth, it can become a space for flow to be born. Mihály also points out that modern society is too focused on interaction and forgets we can say thousands of words, text hundreds of messages, make dozens of calls, yet never truly be present next to someone. Flow in relationships does not come from the quantity of contact, but from the quality of presence, where we are not trying to prove anything, not trying to achieve anything, but just living fully with each other in the same rhythm. And then he admits that achieving this is not easy. It requires discipline, the ability to endure the feeling of emptiness, the ability not to react immediately when misunderstood, and the ability not to scream for lack of attention. In other words, to have a flow relationship, you must agree to walk through the fiercest areas of solitude without losing yourself. Mihály concludes this chapter with a paradoxical image. He compares people who know how to live alone to ceramic artisans. They sit alone in their workshop, hands molding every piece of clay, no one watching, no one applauding. But it is from that solitude that they create form. And when they meet someone who's also creating something with their own hands, the two do not need to say much. They just need to place their works side by side, and a deep conversation will unfold naturally. All order is temporary. That is the first law of life, and also what humans constantly try to deny. We build houses, make plans, establish institutions, write law books. But deep down, chaos is always lurking. Accidents, betrayal, sickness, failure, war, loss, things that arrive unannounced, overturning all intentions without warning. And the question is not how to avoid chaos, but how we will react when it comes. Mihály begins this chapter with a very honest admission. There are flows that are ruthlessly cut short. A person in a state of peak creativity loses a loved one. An entrepreneur who just found meaning in work goes bankrupt. An artist who found freedom then contracts a serious illness. The deepest states of life are sometimes shoved into an absurdity of collapse that defies explanation. But it is in that darkest place that Mihály poses a challenging question. Can we deceive chaos? Not by avoiding it, but by turning it into raw material for flow. He tells of a photographer who lost his entire family in a car accident. For months, the man did nothing, just sat in the dark, not photographing, not speaking, not living. Then one day, he picked up his camera and started photographing trash, specifically discarded, fragmented things that no one bothered to look at. Each photograph was a way for him to restore consciousness by finding small order within the mess. Those frames did not save anyone else, but they saved him. That was his way of deceiving chaos, imposing structure upon it with his personal consciousness. Mihály calls this the art of self-organization under impossible conditions, not a false kind of positivity. Not everything happens for a reason. He is not selling belief. He is offering a tool, the skill to find inner order when there is nothing left outside to rely on. This skill does not come from formal education. It comes from repeatedly facing loss and surviving it by creating a structured experience, however small or invisible. Mihály compares it to a person rowing a boat in a storm. You cannot stop the waves. You cannot command the sea. But you can hold the oar, adjust your rhythm, and prevent the boat from spinning aimlessly. And sometimes, the very act of rowing in chaos gives you a deeper sense of being alive than at any other time. A key point he makes is that flow is not dependent on favorable circumstances. It is dependent on the structure of consciousness. People who have lived in concentration camps, on battlefields, or in prisons can still achieve flow if they maintain minimal control over how they organize their experience. A prime example is Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, who described finding meaning right in the midst of hell, not by denying suffering, but by building a mental frame to embrace it. Mihály agrees with this and expands on it. Not everyone can do it immediately, but if you practice generating flow from simple daily activities, you will gradually build a chaos-resistant structure in your mind, and when a major event occurs, you will not immediately collapse. You already have the tool, the skill, to reorganize consciousness in conditions of uncertainty. Mihály does not romanticize resistance to chaos. He names it for what it truly is, a counterattack of consciousness against collapse. And this counterattack does not have to be heroic. Sometimes, it starts with simple actions, continuing to make the bed in the morning, continuing to write in the journal every night, continuing to cook a decent meal, not for anyone, not to prove anything, but because those actions show that you are still here. You can still create structure. He makes a very sharp analysis. The chaos outside, whether political, economic, natural disaster, or personal loss, only truly destroys you if it makes you abandon the ability to create meaningful experience. And the moment you no longer believe you can create a worthwhile moment, you have surrendered. Therefore, Mihály suggests that the deepest reaction to chaos is not to fight, but to design. You cannot control the storm, but you can redesign the boat, reset your habits, and set new small goals. These things that seem meaningless actually help you regain your footing. He tells of a woman who lost her husband in the war. When asked how she overcame it, she did not talk about faith or hope. She talked about learning to bake, not to sell, not to forget, but because baking every day gave her a process. Measuring, mixing the dough, kneading, regulating the temperature, smelling the rising aroma. All of those things created a process that she could control, and that process was her sanctuary. Mihály calls this the capacity to microstructure experience. It means that when the world becomes too vast, too chaotic, you shrink your scope, but deepen it to a point that no one can violate. A properly brewed cup of tea, a run following the rhythm of your breath, a page written that needs no reader. These units of life, if properly organized, become the nucleus for flow, even in crisis. To strengthen his argument, he points out that most people who overcome adversity do so not because they are stronger, but because they are better at creating flow under restricted conditions. They find a way to enter a process and allow that process to protect them from disintegration. Mihály also points out a subtle trap. People with too many choices in peacetime are often poor at resisting chaos because they are accustomed to having a ready-made structure. When the structure breaks, they do not know where to rebuild from. Conversely, people who are used to living in uncertainty often have a higher capacity for self-organization, and that is why individuals who have experienced poverty, war, and crisis have remarkable endurance in situations that modern people find unbearable. From this, Mihály concludes that the only way to deceive chaos is not to defeat it, but to render it valueless in your frame of reference. You do that by not letting the event define the experience, but by letting the experience define you. He writes, even in the concentration camp, the survivors were not necessarily the healthiest, but the ones who still maintained an inner process they could call their own. It is the very act of possessing even a small experience that prevents a person from being devoured. This chapter ends not with advice, but with an open challenge. Practice living in flow while everything is still under control, so that when chaos arrives, you won't have to start from zero, because chaos will come. That is certain. But if you are subtle enough, you will know how to invite it into your home, not to surrender, but to turn it into a supporting character in a structured experience created by yourself. If you strip away all the layers of a life's money, achievements, relationships, fame, what remains will be a bare question. What does all of this mean? Whether you are living on the top floor of a glass building or in a small room at the end of an alley, whether you manage a global business or sell vegetables at a wholesale market, that question still arrives, without an appointment, without discrimination, and if you do not have a ready-made structure to answer it, it will drown you in a very patient kind of nothingness. Mihály does not treat meaning as a distant, metaphysical concept. He approaches it like a system designer approaching an information architecture. Meaning is order and experience. Without order, you see life as random, and if everything is random, you will no longer have a reason to choose, strive, or live deeply. He writes, humans cannot endure prolonged chaos unless they can tell a story in which that chaos has a place. This means meaning does not come from the event. It comes from how you link the events. A story, if solid enough, can hold you together even when life begins to shatter. Mihály does not ask, Does your life have meaning? He asks, are you organizing your experience according to a structure you choose yourself? Here, he introduces a key concept: directed order. You do not need to control everything, but you need a direction. You do not need to explain the entire universe, but you need an internal logic to live by, and specifically, that logic should not be borrowed. He points out that most people live by ready-made meanings: religion, tradition, collective belief systems. That is not wrong. But if you do not master the interpretation of those meanings, you will become a slave to a mental structure created by others. At that point, all your efforts, however well-intentioned, are the actions of someone living a borrowed life. Instead, Mihály encourages each person to design their own structure of meaning, like a gardener building their mental garden from scratch. Which plants do you choose to grow? That is your living value. You water them every day. That is action. You create fences, lay paths, and decorate. That is how you organize priorities, and every such decision, if intentional, will gradually shape a feeling of a meaningful life. One very interesting point he makes: you do not need to find an ultimate meaning. You just need to ensure that every experience of yours fits within a process where you can read the order. Like a piece of music, you do not need to know the ending, but every note must connect to a melody. Mihály tells of a social worker who had experienced much personal injustice, and instead of letting those wounds turn him into a bitter person, he chose to use them as raw material to understand others. With every act of help, he did not do it out of duty or salvation, but because it strengthened the life story he was writing. No one paid him to do it, but the very process of rewriting mental order from broken pieces is why he felt his life was not meaningless. Mihály emphasizes, meaning is not inherent in experience. It is created, and the process of creation, if performed under flow conditions, becomes a sustainable source of life energy. Mihály asks a very simple question that few dare to answer honestly. What are you living for? Not career goals, not childhood dreams, and certainly not what your parents wished for. He asks, what is the thread that runs through everything, keeping you from unraveling when all other roles fall away? If one day you have no title, no one calls your name, no more goals to achieve, what remains? And the answer, if there is one, will be the meaning that you have silently built or carelessly lost in your everyday action. He says that the people with the strongest flow are often the ones with a clear structure of meaning, not because they found the ultimate truth, but because they chose a direction and lived consistently with it long enough for it to become an identity. That could be a love for a profession, a belief in justice, an inexplicable commitment to beauty, to nature, to precision, or to compassion. And when those people enter an activity, however small, they can achieve a deeper, more sustainable flow state, because every action they take is a brick placed on the foundation of something larger than themselves. Mihály also points out something rarely discussed in happiness theories. The sophisticated boredom of modern people does not come from a lack of stimulation, but from a lack of meaning structure. You can travel to 10 countries a year, eat at restaurants every week, have friends, a partner, and a stable job, yet still feel empty, because you don't know where you are going, or, worse, you know, but that direction was not chosen by you. So, how can one design a personal system of meaning? Mihály offers a 3-layered model. 1. Core values, what you believe is right, not because someone told you or because of a trend. If necessary, you are willing to pay the price to keep it. 2. Medium-term goals, things you are building, not to prove something but to realize the core values in practice. 3. Daily activities, every small action each day, if well designed, becomes the place where you feel you are living true to your system. He calls this the architecture of an ordered life. And when you live within that architecture, you don't need motivation. You don't need anyone to push you, because every action connects to a deeper layer, where you feel you are writing a life blueprint that only you understand, but it makes you want to keep writing. He tells of a middle-aged man who is addicted to alcohol, unemployed, and lost his family. This man could not find a reason to live until one day he went to a community sharing session and heard the story of a younger person standing on the brink of addiction. He spoke a few words and went home. That night, he didn't drink. The next day, he returned, and from then on, he began helping others, not as a savior, but as someone saving himself by creating flow from supporting others. Every word, every shared moment was a link connecting him to something larger, a version of life he had never had the chance to experience before. Mihály suggests that this is the peak of flow, when it not only optimizes experience, but also creates a structure of meaning for the entire life. At that point, you are no longer chasing individual interesting moments. You are designing a life where every moment, however small, is part of a grand structure and is inherently valuable. He concludes the chapter with a statement that is not advice but a reminder. Meaning does not come from the outside. It comes from the courage to look at the chaos inside and start arranging it into a form you can live with. And if you can do that, you are not just living, you are building a reason to keep living, even when every other reason disappears. We have just completed a strange journey, not long in pages, but deep in every layer of consciousness. Flow is not a book that you understand immediately after the first read. It is like a constantly smoldering underground river, demanding that you engage not just with reason, but with the very rhythm of your life. If you have listened this far, thank you, not just for your time, but for your presence amidst a noisy world. Your patience in accompanying us through every abstract concept, every slice of inner life, is an act of courage. Not everyone is brave enough to face the question of whether they are living or just repeating. I hope you will leave a line, any line, about this book. No need for praise, no need to agree. Just be honest. What did you see? What did you not understand? How did you feel uneasy? Because sometimes, the very act of writing is the first step to redesigning your own flow. If you are holding a book that makes you both curious and confused, or you feel that this book would be interesting if retold, please send it to us. The book team does not promise to be fast, but we promise to do it with integrity. Because every book, if it truly has something that needs to be said, deserves to be reborn in a new form. And if you want to continue the journey with books that are not easy, not rushed, but can quietly change the way you see the world, then follow the book channel. Not because of quality content or periodic releases, but because this is a place where we, the people who still believe in words, are still eager to find a different way of living. And who knows, next time you might be the one to initiate a new journey. Now, goodbye and see you again.